Good morning. Welcome to another edition of Tech Tuesday, presented by Delta Media Group, where we feel like it wouldn't be Christmas if somebody didn't get fed after midnight. So, today we are going to go in and take a look at seller reports. We've looked at seller reports before, many a time before, but our last video was pretty old on them, and I know we've added some new things on and off here, so I wanted to jump into them so that we could take a look. So, let's go into the Delta Net and see where they're at. Now, to get to seller reports, and actually, first off, what a seller report is a report that you would send off to your sellers, or the system will send to your sellers for you periodically, that includes things like listing traffic information and comparable listings that are currently on the market. Depending on what we have data for, they could conceivably show traffic from even other sources, or they could show even showings if there's a connection to like a third party with showing information. So there's a lot of information that can be included on these reports depending on what it is we have access to, basically. Now, to set one up, we're going to go down to Listings and then click on Active Listings. And we'll go down to our listings here. And for whichever one we would like to set up our seller report for, we will click on Tools, and that brings up our kind of marketing tools menu here. And then one of the options is Seller Reports. So this listing in particular already has one seller report set up, and that is why it says here one report to agent and seller. If there were no reports set up for this listing already, then it would say none set right here. Either way, whatever it says here, we'll click on it, and that'll take us into the kind of seller report system or the seller report dashboard here. So we can see because we have one set up, it shows us our one seller report. If we were to create a new one, or creating our first one, we would go up here and click on the button that corresponds to the one we want to set up. So do you want to set up a report to just the seller, or do you want one that goes to you as the agent? And keep in mind that you can, in the last step of this setup, make the report go to both. So in this case, I'll just say report to the seller. And that takes us here to this menu. Now we're going to put in our seller's name. The best seller person. Feeling super creative this morning. The best seller at seller person. And now once we have their information put in, I'm going to click on next. Now that takes me here. Now what it will do here is where it says sellers found, it says no matching sellers right now. What it's doing is it's checking for any account that I have assigned to me already, or any of the leads that are already in my database, to see if any of them have the email address that I just entered. If any of them did, it would allow me to select them from a list here, and I could choose which customer account it is I want to attach this seller report to. However, since it didn't find any matches, it gives me the option of adding a new seller. So it's going to add a new contact to my database in here. So I'm going to click Add Seller. And now that takes us to step 3 of the seller report setup, and you can see by default it says seller with a copy to the agent. So with this version, this is one where you would also get a copy. But if I want to change this, I can click here and I can change it. Oh, I'm falling apart this morning. I can change it to go to just myself as the agent, or go to just the seller, or leave it so that it sends to the seller and then sends me a copy every time it goes out. One thing you can do with these is you could set up multiple seller reports. So you could set up one that just goes to yourself, and then another one that just goes to the seller. And because these will go out on a certain day of the week, you can have one go to yourself on, say, Monday of every week, and then the same report go out to your seller on Tuesday or Wednesday. That way you get it ahead of time, you can take a look at it, and then if there's anything you don't like, you can go in and you can pause or stop that seller report from going out before it sends out to them. So in this case, we'll just leave it with seller with a copy to the agent. It's going to say send on Tuesday because today happens to be Tuesday, but I can change that to any day of the week as I want. And then under frequency, I can change it if I don't want these to go out weekly. I can have them go out bi-weekly or monthly instead. And then lastly, I can pick an initial send date. And the idea here is kind of, if this listing just came on the market, maybe you want it to be on market for a while and gather up some stats before you start sending the reports, but you want to set the report up right away just so that you don't forget. So you can use this initial send date, and let's say this listing just came on the market and I want to give it a few weeks. I'll just click here and then I'll click out a couple of weeks, and then it won't send the first one until it gets to that date. Now at that point, I can just click on Finish and I can be done and let this report do its thing. However, if I would like to further modify it and Now, mainly this pertains to the comps that will show up on these reports. I can go down here into these override system defaults, and I can change the price range, and you can see it put in a price range for me, and it put in square footage and everything. It automatically fills all those in based on the listing that I'm setting this up for. But if I want to override any of those for any reason, I can do that here. Now as we go down, one thing in particular importance about that, and part of the reason we put this feature in, was let's say you have a condo that's on the market and you don't want to compare it to other single family homes because those aren't necessarily comparable. You could go down here and limit this to say just condo and townhouse and take out single family. And then for comps, it's only going to look at condo and townhouse listings. It's not going to also look at the single family listings. And you can fine tune that however you'd like. You can even choose different property categories. So if this were a seller report for a multifamily listing, something like that, or even a commercial listing, you can modify these property types so that it only looks at that certain type of listing. So we'll change that back to single family. And then lastly, I can also modify the location type. So you can see here, it says by default, it'll do a lookup for comparable listings by state, city, and zip code. Now what you can do here is, let's say that everything, it's a very large zip code, for example, and everything in that zip code isn't necessarily going to be comparable to this listing, even if it's in the same price range. So what I could do is click up here, and I could select something even more specific, like I could go down to subdivision, and then I could put in a subdivision or multiple subdivisions, and it would consider all those listings comparable. Or by the other way around, let's say zip code isn't necessarily too big, but it's just not going to be representative of the right listings. I can narrow this down to any of these other options, and let's say multiple subdivisions, for example. Let's say you have multiple subdivisions that all contain listings in kind of the same community. So you would consider all the listings in any of those subdivisions to be comparable. You can select subdivision here, and then you can start typing out all the subdivision names, and then just listings in those areas are the ones that will be considered as comparables on the report. So it really lets you fine-tune what listings you look at, which listings are going to be comparable, so that you give the seller the best impression and the best idea of what it is that their listing is actually competing against. Now lastly, if you were including solds in these reports, you can use this slider to determine how far back you want to look at solds. So the idea here is that if you have listings in the same market and roughly the same price range that sold 2 years ago, those aren't necessarily going to be representative of the market anymore, so those might not be listings or sales that you want to present to your seller. So what you would do is use this slider and say, I only want to include sold listings that have sold within the last, say, 60 days. And that way it limits that so that you're not getting those really old sold listings anymore. And you can see all the different options you can set for this slider. Or if you leave it on default, it'll include all solds and it won't care how old they are. So once you have it all set up, we'll click on Finish. And there you go. So our existing report is in here still, this seller test one here. And then the best seller person is the one we just added. So we can see here it is. That's the email address. Right now it's turned on. It is set to send a copy to the agent as well as going to the seller, and it'll go out on every Tuesday. Now if I want to modify that at all, I can click this little plus sign here and expand this. Now I can click on Modify and I can turn it on or off, or change any of the criteria that I just set. I can delete it. I can hit Send Now, and it'll immediately fire this off to the seller. And I say immediately, it goes into our mail queue, so it might not go out instantly, but usually it's pretty quick. And then lastly, I can view the history here. And this one, of course, has no history because I just made it, but what it'll show here is the same kind of history that you see in the other email marketing tools in here. So how many were sent, how many were opened, and how many the user clicked through on to actually go in and see the report. So that way you can see if your seller is actually going in and viewing these reports that you're sending every week. Now the other piece you have here is a Send Preview email button, and what that'll do is fire this email off, but it doesn't actually send it out to the seller. This one just sends a preview out to you, so it just sends you a preview of the seller report. So there you go. That is how you get the seller reports set up initially, or set up to go out to customers. Now the other thing you can do to configure these reports is we'll go down here to Preferences and Email Messages. And if I scroll all the way down to the bottom, you can see Seller Report Options. So if I expand that, this is where you can find those options to customize what kind of information shows up on those reports. you can see competing listings, pending, sold. So you can turn all those sections on and off to determine whether or not those things are included. You can include lifetime stats for that listing if you'd like, so there's a checkbox for that. And whether or not upcoming and past open houses and everything will show up in those reports. So it just gives you the ability to kind of fine-tune those a little bit. Keep in mind that this is a setting that applies to all the seller reports you send. So you can't customize these settings per seller report at this time. Right now you can just go in here and you can customize them across the board for all of your seller reports. Now the next thing you have here is you can also choose from different templates. Template 3 is our newest, and that one has the most functionality and the most support for any newer or third-party data we might be including on those. So generally you'll want to stick with template 3. The other two are here, but they won't include as much information necessarily if we have additional information as template 3 will. So there you go. Those are seller reports, and that is a seller report system in the DeltaNet. So as always, thanks a lot for joining me this week. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, feel free to give us a call or send us an email at support@deltagroup.com, and we'll be happy to answer any questions. So thanks a lot for joining me, and I will see you again next week.